Laura had always lived a quiet life. As a history teacher, her days were filled with books, lessons, and the occasional pursuit of peaceful moments. When she inherited her grandmother's old house, she saw it as a chance to start fresh, far from the bustling city life. The house was located in a small village surrounded by a dense forest, where silence was the dominant sound. Its structure was charming, yet clearly weathered by time. However, one peculiar detail bothered Laura from the start: a window that simply wouldn't lock. When she entered the house for the first time, a mix of nostalgia and unease washed over her. The scent of aged wood and the sound of her footsteps echoing off the walls created a melancholic atmosphere. While exploring the space, she noticed that all the doors and windows were in good condition, except for one. In the master bedroom, the window on the left side refused to stay shut. No matter how hard she tried, it would always spring open, as if it had a mind of its own. Initially, Laura chalked it up to a mechanical issue, perhaps a worn-out hinge or the effect of mountain winds that swept through the area. But soon she began noticing things that defied easy explanation. At night, even when the wind was still, she would hear the wood creaking as if something was forcing the window open. By morning, it was always wide open. Things took an even stranger turn when Laura discovered claw-like scratch marks on the wooden frame of the window. These weren't ordinary marks. They resembled deep gouges made by sharp nails. Determined to fix the problem, she called a local carpenter, but the man politely refused, muttering something about old stories tied to the house. Confused by his reluctance, Laura resolved to handle the issue herself. As days went by, the window became an obsession for Laura. She spent long hours trying to figure out why this particular opening seemed to defy reason. Every attempt to lock it failed, and deep down, she began to sense that this wasn't merely a structural issue. However, as a rational person, Laura refused to entertain supernatural explanations. One evening, while preparing dinner, she heard a distinct sound coming from the master bedroom. It was as if fingers were scraping against the window pane. Trembling, Laura grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs slowly, repeating to herself that there had to be a logical explanation. When she opened the bedroom door, she found the room bathed in faint moonlight. The window, once again, was open. Taking a deep breath, she approached the window and shone her flashlight on the glass. What she saw made her heart race. Handprints on the inside of the window pane, as though someone had pressed their fingers against the glass from inside the house. That was impossible. She was alone. Or was she? In the days that followed, Laura tried to ignore the events. She began avoiding the master bedroom altogether, opting to sleep on the couch in the living room. But the sounds from upstairs didn't stop. Sometimes it was footsteps. Other times, it was incomprehensible whispers. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing night, and Laura started to wonder if the house she had inherited was truly a gift or a curse. Desperate to understand what was happening, Laura decided to search through her grandmother's belongings. Among boxes of trinkets and old photo albums, she found a leather-bound diary. As she flipped through the yellowed pages, it became clear that her grandmother had used it to document her life in the house. But the tone of the entries grew darker the more she read. In one of the early entries, her grandmother mentioned the window. "I don't know what's wrong with the master bedroom window, but it never locks. It seems to have a mind of its own." This was followed by increasingly unsettling accounts. The woman described hearing voices and seeing shadows near the window at night. In another entry, she wrote, "Something passes through it. Something that doesn't belong to this world." Later in the diary, Laura found references to rituals her grandmother performed in an attempt to repel the presence. Despite these efforts, the activity never ceased. Her grandmother also wrote about disturbing dreams of hands emerging from the window, trying to grab her. One particular entry sent chills down Laura's spine. "My brother disappeared when we were children. The last time I saw him, he was standing by the window, looking outside. When I got closer, he was gone." With her thoughts racing, Laura began to piece things together. Perhaps the window was more than just a structural oddity. Perhaps it was a portal, a gateway to something unknown. In the nights that followed, the phenomena intensified. Along with the whispers and claw marks on the wood, Laura began to have recurring dreams. In them, she wandered through the forest surrounding the house, always guided by a strange flickering light in the distance. The sensation of being watched accompanied her in these dreams, as if something was luring her into the shadows. Determined to find answers, Laura went to the village center to speak with the oldest residents. After much persuasion, an elderly woman agreed to talk. Sitting in her rocking chair, the woman shared a story that had been passed down as local folklore. According to her, the forest was home to ancient spirits, guardians of portals between worlds. Any opening, such as a window, could become a gateway for these entities. "They lure the curious," the woman said. "That's what happened to your great uncle. And it could happen to you if you're not careful." Despite the warning, Laura felt compelled to understand what was happening. That night, armed with a flashlight and her grandmother's diary, she decided to follow the trail from her dreams. The path was dark and twisted, and the feeling of being watched was almost unbearable. When she reached the source of the light, she found something unexpected: an old gravestone covered in moss bearing the name of her great uncle. It was as though the place was connected to the house, or worse, to the window. After discovering her great uncle's gravestone, Laura returned home with more questions than answers. Why was his grave hidden so far away and not in the village cemetery? What did it mean in relation to the window? Her grandmother must have known all this and still chose to live in the house. Since her visit to the forest, the feeling of being watched had intensified, as if something had followed her back. That night, as Laura reviewed the diary, she came across what appeared to be a prayer or incantation. The text was cryptic and partially illegible, but it seemed related to protection against those who watch. Deciding to give it a try, Laura gathered coarse salt, creating a circle around the window. In the center, she placed a candle and began reciting the words. At first, the atmosphere remained calm, but as soon as she finished the first reading, the room's energy shifted. The air grew heavy, the candle extinguished itself, and a low, guttural sound echoed in the room. Suddenly, the window began to tremble, and something pressed against the glass from the outside. It was as if a shadow was trying to force its way in. Terrified, Laura retreated but stayed within the circle of salt, clutching the diary like a shield. The disturbance ended as abruptly as it began. But that night, Laura had a vivid and haunting dream. She was back in the forest, surrounded by indistinct figures whispering her name. When she woke up, she found something on the floor beside her bed, a small object resembling an amulet that hadn't been there before. The amulet was carved from wood and looked ancient, with symbols Laura couldn't identify. Instinctively, she felt it was significant. Hoping to decipher its meaning, she took it to a local historian who had helped her before. He was intrigued and explained that the main symbol represented protection against interdimensional entities. According to him, it was an artifact used by ancient cults in the region. Laura began to grasp that her struggle with the window's presence was part of something much larger. Perhaps her family had been entangled with these entities for generations. The historian also mentioned that cults would often place items like the amulet at critical points, such as portals, to prevent them from being used. However, for some reason, the amulet had been removed. When Laura returned home, she noticed something even more unsettling. The window, which had stayed locked the previous night, was now completely open again. There was no sign of wind, and the objects on the windowsill remained undisturbed. That's when it struck her. The amulet had been placed near the window to protect it, and its removal now left the portal unguarded. As night fell, Laura decided to put the amulet back near the window, reinforcing the area with a fresh circle of salt. Determined to uncover the truth, she prepared herself to face whatever might come next, even if it meant confronting her deepest fears. The night was marked by an oppressive silence. Laura stayed in the room, clutching the diary and watching the window. Shortly after midnight, she noticed a mist forming outside, despite there being no forecast of fog. The sensation of something approaching grew stronger until it happened. A figure materialized. It was humanoid but deformed, with features that vaguely resembled a human face, yet warped as if seen through rippling glass. Its eyes were two glowing, empty orbs, and a wide, unnatural smile stretched across its face. The entity didn't cross into the room but stood still, staring directly at Laura. In her mind, she heard a voice that wasn't hers. "You opened the way, now close it if you can." The amulet began to glow faintly, and the entity seemed to recoil. Trembling, Laura held the object tightly and started reciting the prayers from the diary again. This time, something felt different. The entity appeared to resist, pressing against the invisible barrier created by the amulet. Suddenly, the window glass shattered, and the figure surged forward. Laura barely had time to react before she was engulfed in complete darkness. Laura awoke in an unfamiliar place. She was no longer in her room, but in a dark forest surrounded by slowly moving shadows. The air was cold, and the amulet in her hand felt warm to the touch. Around her, indistinct figures whispered words in an unrecognizable language. She tried to stand, but it felt as though the ground itself was holding her in place. Then, a familiar voice echoed through the forest. "You must seal the portal. Only you can do it." Laura recognized it as her grandmother's voice, though no one was visible. Struggling, she began to walk, guided by a faint light in the distance. The path was treacherous, and with every step, the sensation of being watched grew more oppressive. When she finally reached the source of the light, she froze. It was the window from the house floating in a void. The shadows around her began to wail, trying to stop her from getting closer. But Laura, clutching the glowing amulet, took a determined step forward. She knew she had to seal the portal, but the method remained a mystery. As Laura approached the floating window, the weight of the surrounding presences pressed heavily on her. Each step drained her strength, as if the very air resisted her advance. The shadows, once murmuring, now screamed in an unknown tongue, their intent clear, to prevent her from reaching the window. Yet, an unyielding force within her pushed her forward. The amulet in her hand glowed brightly, its light cutting through the oppressive darkness. Laura began to recite the words from the diary, her voice trembling but resolute. The window shimmered, revealing a horrifying sight beyond. Her bedroom, warped and pulsating with an ominous darkness. The humanoid entity stood on the other side, its grotesque features illuminated by an unnatural glow. It reached out, pressing its clawed hand against the glass as if trying to pull her in. "Seal the portal!" Her grandmother's voice rang out again, now more urgent than ever. Laura pressed the amulet against the window. The moment it made contact, the entity let out a piercing, otherworldly shriek. Shadows swirled violently around her, trying to pull her away, but she held her ground, her focus unbroken. The window began to close slowly, as though an invisible force were sealing it shut. The entity thrashed in desperation, its claws scraping against the closing barrier. With a final surge of strength, Laura shouted the last words of the incantation. The window erupted in a blinding flash of light, and everything fell silent. When Laura opened her eyes, she was back in her bedroom. The oppressive darkness had vanished, replaced by the soft glow of early morning sunlight filtering through the curtains. The once turbulent atmosphere of the room was now eerily calm. She looked at the window, the source of so much terror, and saw that for the first time it was securely locked. The amulet, now cold in her hand, lay dull and unremarkable, as if its power had been exhausted. The diary rested beside her, its pages still open to the final incantation. Exhausted, Laura sat up and looked around. Everything seemed different, lighter somehow, as though the house itself had been cleansed. Yet, despite the tranquility, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. Small details, like family photos missing from the walls or furniture slightly out of place, hinted at an unsettling truth. Her victory had not come without consequences. Laura decided that she could no longer stay in the house. By the afternoon, she had packed her belongings and left, locking the front door for the last time. As she walked to her car, she glanced back at the bedroom window. It remained securely shut, but a deep unease lingered in her chest, as though a part of her would always be tied to the horrors she had endured. Lives on months passed, and Laura began to rebuild her life in a new city. Although she had moved on physically, the memories of her time in that house never quite left her. The trauma remained, lingering like an unresolved knot. Using her experience as a way to warn others, she started a blog dedicated to stories about allegedly haunted places, blending skepticism with just a hint of belief in the supernatural. However, she never shared her own experience with the mysterious window. One day, she received messages from people in the village, all reporting strange occurrences at the house since Laura had left. The whispers and shadows that had once filled the space seemed to have stopped, and it appeared that the portal had been sealed for good. But there was one message that made her heart race. A young man who had passed near the house at night claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing in the bedroom, gazing out the window. Despite the fear that surged through her, Laura felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps her actions had indeed sealed the portal, but the house seemed to carry a piece of that malevolent force within it, forever tied to its history. Even if the entity had been contained, it seemed to have found a way to persist, quietly waiting for another opportunity. One evening, while writing on her blog, Laura heard a sound she hadn't heard in months, the creaking of a window slowly opening. She froze, her blood running cold. Turning, she saw her own bedroom window ajar, though she had closed it before going to bed. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer and saw the unmistakable marks on the glass, the same marks she had once seen on the window in the old house. Suddenly, a sense of dread swept over her. She turned off the lights, convinced that, for the first time in a long while, the past was no longer behind her. Laura's story is not just a tale of terror. It is a reminder that some mysteries are larger than we can comprehend. In our pursuit to uncover the unknown, we sometimes open doors that were never meant to be opened. And even when we manage to close them, something always remains on the other side, waiting for another chance. Through her courage, Laura saved not only herself, but perhaps others who might have fallen victim to the entity. However, she also became a part of the story, forever bound to the enigma of the window that would never lock. The house, the portal, and the entity had left their marks on her, and perhaps some part of them would always follow her. If this story has intrigued or frightened you, remember this: not every window should be opened, and not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes the wisest thing we can do is respect the unknown and keep our own windows securely locked.